a mom reached out to me who is a self-directed person and educator and leader in the community, and she was asking about trauma and how off the beaten path learning helps with trauma, if it helps with trauma. And on the website, in the in theory page of off the beaten path learning, clear as day, it says trauma informed. And that is throughout everything. So with the team, with the educators, with partners, with ourselves, with learners, definitely, with families, definitely. Doesn't matter. If you are a part of Off the Beaten Path Learning, it is my goal as the founder to ensure that there is an understanding of what trauma is and how to respond to it when it's in play. So this video is, I wanted to share a little bit about how that happens with Off the Beaten Path Learning, what we do, how we approach it, and what is my perspective, what makes me have a right to talk about any of this, and also we'll go into like a little bit about what trauma is from my perspective. So I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD. I was diagnosed at 17, 18, somewhere around my 18th birthday. And I've been in therapy since a very, very young age, 3 years old, and on and off, mostly on. And so I've had a lot of personal time to work through trauma. A lot. So that's the number one thing that teaches me anything about this experience, is just going through it myself. Also, I am trained in therapeutic crisis intervention out of Cornell University. I am trained in mental health first aid for youth and for adults. Both of those trainings and the one I'm about to mention are thanks to enormous shout out to Red Hook Initiative in Brooklyn. If you have money to give it to Red Hook Initiative. If you have funding and you're a philanthropist and you're watching this right now, go to rhicenter.org, give them your money. They do amazing work. Amazing work. They're not perfect, but they do amazing work. So, okay. CPTSD lived experience, therapeutic crisis intervention, mental health first aid. Now, really the training that I come back to the most when it comes to trauma is from Dr. Jacob Hamm, who is at Mount Sinai in New York. He is the complex trauma, big guy on campus. And he's the best. I don't know him, like he doesn't know me. We met the one time, in 2017 when he trained me in that full day intensive, and it was intensive. The workshop was called Engaging Traumatized Youth, I think. And it was for people that work with youth, like myself. At the time, I was an academic advisor for Red Hook Initiative. And that workshop blew me out of the water, hit me, smacked me 10 ways to, something. And what was interesting is that he was teaching about engaging traumatized youth, and there I was, engaging with my trauma. Because when you have CPTSD and you're learning about trauma, it's kind of like you're being triggered again to like revisit all of the stuff that put you in that position. So like not fun, but useful. And so that workshop really taught me the most long-lasting, impactful lessons I know about trauma. one thing that really stuck with me, and he says this quite a bit, is that it's similar, the experience of being traumatized and, well, the experience of revisiting trauma, let's call it that, is akin to being the Hulk. Not about the Hulk, honestly, but I think he's a scientist, so he's very smart, very logical on his day-to-day, like, you know, when he's not the Hulk, but then all of a sudden, you know, he needs to be angry, and so he gets angry, and then all of a sudden all his logical scientificness, all that side of him just goes out the window. All of a sudden he's like ripped shirt, he's all green, he's 7,000 times the size he usually is. That happens to people, not superheroes that aren't the Hulk, but people. And it's the way I think of trauma is that it is, in one word, disconnect. It is disconnect. The opposite of trauma is presence, is connecting to yourself, to other people, to the world, to nature. It is sitting with yourself, deeply listening to how you're doing. What self-directed education does is really powerful, because if you practice making decisions on like a nano moment by nano moment way, and by exercising those muscles, you end up coming back home to yourself. Because what happens when we're not self-directed? What happens when we're directed by an external entity, like a teacher or a doctor or, you know, a police officer, some external authority, a parent? It doesn't matter. When we're directed by anyone outside of ourselves, too much, and we don't have a say in that, it's incredibly debilitating. And trauma adds to that. But education can also help with healing from trauma. The right education for whomever. Because everyone needs a different kind of structure, a different kind of environment, different kind of motivation, all that. But if what you need is to practice your decision making so that you can come home to your own truth, that will help you. It's not the end all be all, but it will help you to be present. It will help you to reconnect. And it happens very slowly, very like a drop, a drop, a drop, a drop. And then there's an ocean of healing. And it, like when you finally see the ocean, if you ever get to, you know, I mean, the drops are still going. But like once you see it, it's so worthwhile. Yeah. A bit about the neuroscience of trauma. You know what, maybe that's for another time. I'm going to save the neuroscience and the psychology for another time. We don't got time for all that right now. I will, though, speak to how it shows up in Off the Beaten Path Learning a little bit. I'll give you a couple examples. So one example is from a mom, one example is from a learner. The example from the mom, I had a conversation with a parent, and it was a hard one because she was upset, and, you know, I'm human. And the reason she was upset was because I sent an invoice, And normally I don't do that. Normally it's just like, here's what you owe me, pay me this way, and that's it. But this time I sent an invoice, like a piece of paper where it's like digits here and digits here, and it's all very transactional. And she got that invoice and she got upset. And we spoke on the phone, and she expressed to me that it was like dealing with a lawyer. And like the hairs like stand up a little bit. And not because I've got anything against lawyers, but because I understood what she was saying. She was saying, well, this is how I interpreted it. She was saying, like, I love Off the Beaten Path Learning because it's so human. And you are just stripping that away from me when you sent me this invoice. Please never send me an invoice ever again. So I didn't. That is an example of trauma-informed care. Not because she has CPTSD. I don't know. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. Doesn't matter. It is an example of trauma-informed practice because in that moment, you could argue, right, that what she was complaining about was illogical. You could argue that. Most of the time when someone is in trauma mode, is stressed to that point, they're not really making sense. But internally, it makes all the goddamn sense in the world. More sense even than you can handle. And my job as an educator in that moment, and as the founder of this business, was to read between the lines and meet the need. And by understanding what her need was, by really listening deeper than even the words she was putting out there, I was able to say, okay, number one, let me understand this. Let me show with my words and my tone of voice that I really understand what you're telling me right now. Because that will diffuse her stress. If you can to a brain that is on stress level 100,000, if you can simply say to that brain, to that person with that brain, I get you. Like, here's what I hear you saying, and I get it. Or at least I think I get it. And if I'm wrong, please correct me, and then I'll really get it. If you can just understand, you've done like 45% of that exchange, maybe more. So in that example, there was understanding. Second example, also an understanding example. This was a learner. So this learner, I had a practice, and I do this with most learners if they're into it. I have a practice of sharing my screen and going through an agenda, going through like slides, and they've got, some text, some images that are all related to what that learner is doing and wanting and everything. Very custom, down to the colors, down to the types of images, everything, highly personalized. But this learner said, fuck you and your slides. Not verbatim, but like it was, they were mad. They were really mad. And I remember this conversation. It was January, I think, of 2000 and doesn't matter. I remember this conversation because it took 45 minutes. Our meetings were 2 hours, and it took 45 minutes of them talking at me about how upset they were. And I had to just listen. And the listening was hard for me because their upset took some form of insulting me, I felt. But I'm not there as, I'm not showing up purely as Dominique. That's in there, but I'm showing up mostly for them. So I had to listen. And that was how I was showing my understanding, was I was listening keenly, closely, taking those hits, right? Just listening. And their complaint essentially was, this is too structured and it's not helping me. We called it the bins in the boxes. Or sorry, they called it the bins in the boxes. They were like, these bins in these boxes are not helpful, and they're just not working for me. Get rid of them immediately, please. And I did, but the conversation, there was a lot of upset that they had to express. And what was interesting about that experience was that they were upset, and so was I. Like, life is stressful, number one, and I have CPTSD, number two. And so I had to regulate during the conversation and especially after the conversation. I got off that call and had one of the most obvious panic attacks I've ever had in my life. Because I think it was the listening for 45 minutes without speaking and then not having a defensive response. Because talking through your feelings, talking through your experience, all of that helps to regulate, right? All of that is emotional regulation. But I didn't have an opportunity to do any of that because I saw that it would escalate my learner. So I had to do that on my own time. So I, hung up, freaked out, got through it. And so what's interesting about this dynamic, what was interesting about this exchange was that the trauma-informed information that I had, while it wasn't like cognitive and intellectual in that moment, but my training kicked in. And I was able to be trauma-informed toward them and toward me. So I listened to them and I took their hits. And then I did the same thing with myself when I got off the phone or the Zoom. I don't even remember. That was trauma-informed. At the end of the day, to be trauma-informed is about connection. Whether that's understanding the other person, whether that's understanding yourself, trying to sit with it, trying to listen to it, that's the best way forward. The more that you avoid the trauma, the more that you avoid those feelings, the more it will escalate as an issue, as a problem. So instead, choose how you're going to respond. Choose how you're going to show up. Choose how you're going to listen. What meaning you're going to make of it.